And joining me on India First is Professor Faiz Zalan. He's a professor of policy and governance at the Kabul University. Also with me is Jonathan Virtual, former advisor to the US mission at the United Nations, and Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, former top diplomat. And if I may start with Jonathan Virtual, sir, for 20 years, the US trained and armed the Afghan National Army. Now these weapons are with the Taliban. Is this, in your view, as much a defeat for the United States as it is for the Afghan National Army?
It is, Gaurav, just extremely painful to see all this. I personally was actually on the ground in Afghanistan in Mazar Sharif in Kabul in 2001, 2002, when the special forces were going in, the U.S. special forces, and toppling the Taliban. And to find myself speaking about this, I almost feel like I have to wake myself up. It is just astounding to see where it is, and it really is, as your correspondent just correctly pointed out, a formidable arsenal that the Taliban has essentially been gifted by the outcome, the terrible outcome here. This is indeed a tragic situation, and the only thing that brings some level of solace is the international community's holding its collective breath, saying we have to watch what the Taliban does from here on out. And they are, of course, and there's a press conference going on now in which they're espousing all sorts of platitudes and saying things about amnesty and that they're never going to be a terrorist ground again for Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any of the terrible actors on the world stage. But, you know, this is just the beginning of this process, and it's going to be extremely telling and sobering to see what unfolds over the course of the next days, weeks, and years, because they really do have the means to be able to assert themselves in a much more forceful way that can go beyond the borders of Afghanistan.
Professor Zalan, US President Joe Biden blamed both President Ashraf Ghani, who fled, and the Afghan National Army that surrendered. Now, if former President Karzai and Abdullah and Gulbuddin Hekmakhtyar, if they're trying to form a transition government and then hand over power, is that likely to happen given the zero resistance that Taliban had as they reached the presidential palace, the arsenal that they have, and the complete control of the country that they are in, except, of course, that little pocket in Panjshir?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think Taliban have taken over the whole country. So the country is full of so many other reservoirs also. There are revenue generation areas, there are tax, there are borders, so much like India, like many other countries. Afghanistan is also having geostrategic and geopolitical importance, and it's having more than a 30 million population. So it is not only to talk about the weapons and the weaponaries that it is inherited. I think these weapons, these weaponaries, within years, it will become useless. It will have specific depreciation years.
Okay.
The important is the wrath of the country. The important is the governance. The important is the consensus and the acceptance from the people. I think Taliban are pretty much assured they have learned from their 1990s governance, the harshness that they have applied in 1990s, and also the extremism that they brought in. Definition of fundamentalism and extremist ways of governance. Now they have been, as you have rightly reported, and Aisha was rightly explaining that what's going on in the city. There is an acceptance for women's role, for school and education for women, for duties to law and many other media outlets. They are reporting. They are doing their reporting with women anchors, Taliban spokespersons, or attending those commentary. This is a big, I think this is a big achievement, and it's a big change.
You look at it as a big
transition
change.
is going to be
But is this just
a
a media blitz for now? Because Taliban is looking for legitimacy, Ambassador Sajjanhar. Taliban is looking for acceptance. And of course, to run a country like Afghanistan, you require money. To run any country, you require money. I was speaking to a former very senior Afghan government officer, and he said their requirement is about $10 billion a year. They generate about $2 billion. Where will the $8 billion come from? So is Taliban presenting a different face for that $8 billion and legitimacy? Because Pakistan clearly cannot get those $8 billion.
No, absolutely, you're right. I think you are very correct, Gaurav. But I think we also have to keep in mind that there is normally, so far we've seen, as far as the track record of the Taliban is concerned, that there is a huge difference between what they say, what they claim, and actually what they do on the ground. And, the first aspect of this is, the commitment that they have made to the United States, the 3 commitments that they will sever all links with the terrorist organizations, that they will have serious negotiations with the Afghan government that was there earlier, and also that they will not have the commitments that they had made. They have gone back on all of that.
They've gone back on all of that. Very interesting point, because I'm going to play out a report. I want Jonathan Mitchell, since he's served on ground as a soldier and in difficult areas like Mazar-e-Sharif as part of the Special Forces of the United States. Take a look at this report. As the Taliban were advancing towards Kabul, first Kandahar, then Bagram, then Kabul, prison after prison after prison, they released hardcore, high-value terrorists, armed terrorists at one point of time, whether it's of the Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or the Islamic State, and including the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So the face of terror was released. Look at this report.
The face of terror, even in Pakistan, a state sponsor of terror. This is Maulvi Fakir Muhammad, the former deputy chief of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, a faction of the Taliban that has carried out a series of terror attacks inside Pakistan. Maulvi Fakir Muhammad is among top leaders of terrorist organizations including the Al-Qaeda, Taliban and Islamic State, who were released as the Taliban took control of Kabul. The Tehreek-e-Taliban spokesperson confirmed the release of Maulvi Muhammad. A bigger threat, not just for Afghanistan, but also Pakistan, is the fact that the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has pledged allegiance to the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, run by the Taliban.
These are people who have worked with the Taliban, fought with the Taliban, and it's inconceivable that the Taliban, have not released him deliberately. Now, clearly, these are people who are likely to go back and hit Pakistan.
Maulvi Fakir Muhammad is among 5,000 terrorists of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State released from the ultra-high security Bagram prison, Pule-Charki prison in Kabul and the prison in Kandahar as the Taliban moved towards the country's capital. The Bagram prison had the most high-value terrorists, including hardened fighters, and their release poses a threat to security in the region at large. Reports from Afghanistan indicate Commander Zali, Waqas Mehsood, Hamza Mehsood, Qari Hamidullah Mehsood are some of the key Taliban leaders released from prison.
I think they will insist upon the Taliban to give them the same support which these guys gave to the Taliban when the Taliban needed them. So I think we are not seeing the end of warfare and of terrorism. I think what we are likely to see is a new wave of terrorism and warfare in the region going forward.
There are apprehensions even in Pakistan that the release of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan terrorists, including those who hail from Swat, Sargodha, Waziristan and Bajaur, could pose a major threat to Pakistan. However, the Interior Minister of Pakistan, Sheikh Rashid, claims to be in contact with the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan and getting an assurance that Afghan territory will not be used to launch terror attacks on Pakistan. However, there are concerns in Pakistan that the return of the Taliban could embolden other fundamentalist and terror outfits in Pakistan and result in a repeat of scenes like these in Swat. A tourist paradise that had fallen to the Taliban, which in 2008 were barely 150 kilometers from Islamabad. With Gaurav Sawant in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
Jonathan Mitchell, you've served on ground. Your appreciation of what these 5,000 men who were once terrorists or armed fighters, what will they do now? What kind of danger, in your appreciation, do they pose, let's say, to Afghanistan, people in Afghanistan or Pakistan or this entire region?
Gaurav, let me just make a little correction. I was a journalist at the time embedded with Special Forces. I was not serving, but I was on the front line. So I saw it firsthand, and I saw, GIs get injured. I saw a lot of death and destruction, obviously. So firsthand experience in seeing this. One of the things we all learn is that the past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And these really dangerous individuals are out on the loose now. And that is terrifying. These are people who have blood on their hands. They've killed people, and they're perfectly capable of doing it again. So I watched this report again. It's this horrific possibility that things are going to return right back where they were. Yes, the Taliban is right now being observed very carefully. Yes, the U.S. has a modicum of presence, military presence, and the ability to react and to do something, though we all see where this is heading, and it's not going back and trying to fix the situation by inserting U.S. forces again in the long term. This is a whole new game here. I think we have to anticipate that we are going to have a return in some shape or form to what existed before 9/11, and that prospect, regardless of how significant it is a threat to be concerned about. And the biggest issue here for me observing this, and certainly I hope for responsible nations and others observing this who have the ability to do something, it's to try to maintain that threat on the Taliban, that you're on notice that if you do slide back into a world in which women are openly beaten on the street, which I saw with my own eyes,
yes,
or you have people actually being killed because they are seen to be working with NATO or with U.S. forces, that the moment we begin to see this slippage back, we have to do something about it. Otherwise, it's all going to be lost. Because if there's one thing that we all understand,
absolutely,
people armed and with power will go back to their old ways.
Because, that's the point, Professor Zalan. Does a leopard change its spots? Will Taliban 2.0 be different? These 5,000 once fighters now out on the streets, out in the open. What are your expectations or apprehensions?
I think as a country, nation, we don't need to be a terrorist supporting nation and country. We don't need to create a rogue state or support a rogue state in our country. We have lessons learned from our current 40 years of war, 4 decades of war. The expensiveness that you have mentioned previously, we don't need 8 billion or 10 billion for our country to have the biggest army. For a nation which is 30 million population, why should we have 500,000 soldiers?
Okay.
A billion population, India, or more than 200 million population, Pakistan, they are having around 1 million soldiers, and a country like Afghanistan with 30 million, why should we have 500,000 soldiers? So there are expenses, there were a way of rentier state creation for 2 decades from US and NATO forces. They have created a dependent country. We need to relook about that.
Fair enough. That's an interesting point that you make, sir. Ambassador Sajjan Har, that's a fair point you make, sir. Ambassador Sajjan Har, but will Afghanistan be able to take all its decisions on its own, or will Taliban 2.0 be as dependent, if not more, on Pakistan and just end up being a client state of Pakistan?
I think that's $1 million question, Gaurav. But if I could come to the question that you'd posed to the previous panelist, you know, they might not need all that money to run their administration and their government. But I think international legitimacy is very, very important. And international legitimacy is not only important for the aid that they get, but basically for trade, for becoming a member of the United Nations, for having normal relations with the different countries of the world. So it is not only to get those $8 billion.
Okay.
Now, to respond to your question, that whether it will be a pawn in the hands of the Pakistanis, I think as time goes by, the Taliban or whatever the administration is, because I feel, you know, two things I'd like to point out here. Number one, Taliban is not a monolith. Taliban is not a homogeneous entity. There are, as we've been speaking, there are also TTP, there's ISIS, there's Al-Qaeda, there's even
the Haqqani network, the Quetta Shura. But you know, the Haqqani network, the Quetta Shura, Mullah Omar's son, who will they be dependent on?
Exactly. So that's the point that I'm making. You see that there is going to be a lot of tussle between all of them. And, you know, for them to, when they are coming to governance, they have no experience of governance. So who is going to be taking all the decisions, and whether those decisions which are taken, let's say in Kabul, whether they'll be percolate down to the different parts of the country or not. But I feel that once the Taliban is or whatever is the nature of the administration, you know, Taliban, in my view, is going to keep a facade for the world that it is an inclusive administration. So, you know, whatever all the important positions, let's say, go to the Pashtuns, but there are also Tajik, Uzbek, Hazara, maybe a couple of women also, basically to give this impression to the world outside that we are having an
Professor Zalan, is that also your appreciation of what will happen in the days to come? Because then Taliban 2.0 will be very different from the system in the mid-1990s.
You know what happened in 1990s? There were only Taliban. They erased everybody else. They fought against the 7 tanzims, the 7 parties, Mujahideen parties. But now they are working for a more polarized government. They are working for a more national consensus-oriented government. Karzai Sahib is already in Kabul. Dr. Saib Abdullah is already in Kabul. Hikmatyar, once the fiercest fighter against Taliban, he is already in Kabul. And there are many others in Kabul, Salahuddin Rabbani, Khalili, Mahakrik, they are coming, they are joining the new government. I heard today that even Dostam and Atama Madnoor have asked Taliban to pardon them, and they should come back to Kabul to be part of the new political consensus. So there will be a different approach for governance. There will be a different approach for governance. Otherwise, Taliban will face the same sanctions of 1990s, and they will be beaten back by the world. So once a lesson is learned for a wise adult, I think that mistake should not be retreated and repeated next time.
Very interesting. I have a very important bit of information that's coming in from Afghanistan. This is join the resistance. This is being said by Afghanistan's Vice President Amrullah Saleh. In fact, Saleh, who escaped to Panjshir after the Taliban took control of Kabul, says Ashraf Ghani fled. After Ashraf Ghani fled, he is the president of Afghanistan as per the constitution of the country. Amrullah Saleh took to social media to say he's reaching out to all leaders to secure their support and consensus. After Ashraf Ghani fled first to Tajikistan, where incidentally his aircraft was not permitted to land, and then we are told he went to Oman trying to get to the United States of America. Saleh has joined legendary commander Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud, in Panjshir, not in Taliban control, and said Taliban are not like the Viet Cong, and the Afghans have not lost their spirit and see enormous opportunities ahead. Very, very interesting. Okay, once again, Professor Zalan, what do you make of what Amrullah Saleh is saying?
Amrullah Saleh, when he was running for election, he got around 32 votes from Panjshir. He doesn't have any roots in Afghan population. He doesn't have that ability to resist. The strongest people in Afghanistan history, specifically in past Mujahideen history, that was Turan Ismail Khan, that was Dostum, that was Atama Madnoor. They tried their bit and they were defeated harshly by their own people inside their own strongholds like Herat, like Juzjan, like Faryab, like Mazar-e-Sharif.
Okay.
Amrullah Saleh, who is a last person, who is very much demonized with all his very harsh and extreme ideas. I think it is time for a national consensus, for a new approach, for a new way of going forward.
Last 30 seconds that I have on the broadcast, is that also your appreciation, Jonathan Mitchell, that there is no resistance, Taliban completely in control of all of Afghanistan, and Amrullah Saleh is only saying this on Twitter?
Look, they have control. They have the weapons to assure their control. So we have to deal with this. And what we have to, as an international community, and you sitting in India, you know perfectly well how terrorism strikes. And you know the perils even more than yes, I'm in New York City where we had the World Trade Center attack and happened to have been down there, and it was terrible. But you're facing this on the front line, and we have to collectively monitor the situation and not allow anything. Yes, they're on watch right now. They're on good behavior. They're saying things that they wouldn't have said 20 years ago. But in their heart of hearts, given the opportunity, they will go right back to what they are. And leopard spots, you're spot on with that. That's the reality. So how much can we check the situation, and how much can we take advantage of at least what progress was made over the course of a generation? I mean, 20 years is a long time.
It indeed is. And we'll be tracking that story very closely. Jonathan Mitchell, I have run out of time on this part of the show. Professor Zalan and Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, as always, many thanks for joining me here on India First. I need to take a quick break here. On the other side, the situation does remain precarious, and that is why India, we've withdrawn our ambassador, the staff at the Indian mission. The mission, of course, continues with local staff in Afghanistan. Details coming up.